Hey, what's up developers, my name is Hitesh Kohli and welcome back to Developers Commute. In this video, we're going to go forward and study the very basics, the foundation of Android development, the native Android development. And we're going to understand the Jetpack Compose. And for any of the XML guys, if you're new to native Android, this will be the starting point of the series. At the end of the series, you will know everything about the UI. Let's get started with the basics. Now, the first thing that I want to point out is, why do we even need Jetpack Compose? This is a very genuine question. Why do we choose Jetpack Compose over others? Why do we use native Android over Flutter or maybe React Native? Those are our different videos. For now, I will focus on why do we use Jetpack Compose as compared to XML. In short form, Jetpack Compose is used for native Android development, which gives a very native experience. If you have used a Flutter app and compared it to any kind of native Android app, you will realize that the experience and the quality of the native Android app will be much more better than a Flutter app. I agree that Flutter gives you a cross-platform development, so it's much more easier and faster to develop as compared to native Android apps. But if you want quality, best of experience for any kind of app, native is the way. And one of the best advices that I've ever got, if you want to develop apps, develop those apps specifically for a platform. For example, the material theme goes for Android, whereas iOS has a different kind of theme, which means if I introduce material theme to iOS users, then it will be much more foreign to them and the experience wouldn't be that great. That's why it's preferable that you develop the apps separately if you want the best experience. If you want convenience, then go for Flutter or React Native. It's up to you. For now, let's step into Jetpack Compose and try to break it down and compare it to XML. Now, what is actually Jetpack Compose? Jetpack Compose is basically a toolkit that is written Kotlin. It's kind of a library and which can be used to program UI of our native Android app. So these are the two ways that you can develop the UI of an Android app. So why do we need Jetpack Compose over XML? Let's try to break down this question, Jetpack Compose over XML. Let's try to understand the very basics of Jetpack Compose. Now, Jetpack Compose promotes declarative development. Now, what do you mean by declarative development? Basically, if you want to understand declarative development, you need to understand how the XML works. In the older days of Android development, XML actually writes the UI of the app, whereas the Kotlin is used in a different file to produce the logic of that UI. So the logic is actually separated from the UI designed, but in Jetpack Compose, it's actually together. So that's why Jetpack Compose is much more easier to write. Now let's talk about declarative part of it. Now in XML, if you want to find some kind of text, for example, let's assume this is a text here. Now this is some text, right? And this is some UI and we have multiple texts here. And if you want to find this text in our Kotlin file where the logic of the UI is available, we have to use find view by ID. Now here you can see how the XML actually produces the UI. XML actually uses the trees to produce the UI. We just gave an ID to this text and find the view by walking through each node in the tree. That's how we found the XML text. Suppose that we want to update this text. What we have to do is to walk through the node, walk through all the nodes to the text where we want to update it, then go back. That's how the trees work. Now what happens here is if you want to update multiple things inside of the tree, it becomes very time taking and confusing. That's why we use a different approach called the declarative approach, where we don't have to make the trees of the UI. Now how does Jetpack Compose stand out over XML? What Jetpack Compose actually does is instead of going through all the nodes and going to the text that we want to update, Jetpack Compose just makes the whole screen. Now you will ask me the question that if Jetpack Compose makes the whole screen again, wouldn't it be much costlier as compared to just updating the node? The answer is yes, but Jetpack Compose uses what we call recomposition, which means that it only recomposes, it only manages that particular part of the UI which needs to be updated, which means instead of rewriting the whole UI written in Jetpack Compose, it will only recompose updated part of the UI. So it will not update the whole thing, instead just update the small thing. That's how Jetpack Compose works, and that's how the declarative part of it stands out over XML. Let's try to write a simple composable function of Jetpack Compose. We wouldn't be opening any kind of IDE here. We'll just simply write it in here to understand how the Jetpack Compose actually works. If you want to communicate with the Android Studio that I'm declaring a composable function, I need to annotate the function with @composable. Now, this might be overwhelming. What the heck I'm talking about? Function, composable function, what is annotation? Yeah, I get it. Okay, let's break all of these things down and hopefully you will understand it. So everything inside of Android UI are functions. So let's write down. Now this is the basics. Everything in Jetpack Compose is a function. Now how do you tell a function from a composition function, the UI function? How can you separate these two? Now we can do that with the help of annotations. And let me give you a very simple example of annotation. Now what is an annotation? It's some kind of @ that we declare over the function. If you write comp in your Android Studio, it will just automatically make a composable function for you. @composable tells the Android Studio that it is a UI function. You don't need to think of it as a business logic or some kind of logic. It's a UI function. Now let me write the first function. As you can see, this is a very simple hello world function, and this function actually just prints on the UI of the app hello world. Now how do I tell this Android Studio that this is a composable function? It's not a simple function written in Kotlin. We can do that by annotating this function with @composable. C is supposed to be capital. How did I write hello world inside of that app? I use this particular function, the text function. There are many predefined functions. For example, text function, which enables us to write strings in UI. Now I've already explained to you the very basic foundations of declarative development in Jetpack Compose. Now I have been talking about recomposition, how the Jetpack Compose actually does the recomposition of the UI. What do I actually mean by recomposition? What is this recomposition? Now, as you've already seen, let me break it down. Now, recomposition can be broken down into and composition. Now, what is this composition? As you can understand what composition in English means, you are composing something. That's how compose works. You're composing the UI of the Android app. Now, what does mean? Means redoing the UI of Android app. It means that a particular part of the UI that is changed, we update that UI. That's all recomposition means. Now, so let's take an example of recomposition. Now, let me write down a composable function for you guys, and here it is. So name text, it is a simple composable function. We have previously made a hello world composable function here, and it just takes a name of type string in its constructor and gives the UI the text hi, and the name that is given in the constructor is just presented here. What happens is, supposedly we pass Rahul, and it prints Rahul on the screen. Now we want to print Hitesh, right? We pass another function, another of the string, another name string to this function, to the constructor, and it goes into the text and it prints, it should print hi Rahul. It prints hi Rahul, and here it prints hi Hitesh. So what happens is this function gets recomposed, rewritten from the foundation to print the hi Hitesh. Now, how is recomposition beneficial? Let me give you an example. Let's suppose this is a simple composable function. Now what happens is, when I enter Hitesh in the constructor of this function, this text field gets updated. Suppose this was Rahul previously. Now when I enter Hitesh here, instead of recomposing everything in this UI, the Jetpack Compose only recomposes this function, and the rest remains the same. So we don't have to rewrite everything that is inside of the composable function. We write the only thing that's changed. So that's how the recomposition actually works in Jetpack Compose. For now, hopefully you've understood the very basics, the very foundations of Jetpack Compose. For now, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.